Hey everyone, and welcome. My name is Maicon, and this is the Gospel of the Naked, our OiC series on the Gospel according to Saint Mark. This is our fifth Sunday reflection with Mark here in Oslo International Church, and today I want to start with one of those stories in the Bible that tends to make Christians either jumpy and apologetic or passive-aggressive and sort of defensive. Are you all ready for it? We find it in chapter 7 of the Gospel of Mark, starting on verse 24. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it. Yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. "First, let the children eat all they want," he told her, "for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Lord," she replied, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "For such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home and found her child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Whoa, Jesus, take it easy, man. What? It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs? That seems a bit much, doesn't it? This is a text that gets some people trying to avoid what's there and others trying to figure out what's not there. What is there is this reference to children and dogs, which in the context of the text is clearly equated to the woman being a Gentile, a non-Jew. Mark makes sure to spell out that she is a Greek and a Syrophoenician. That has made some interpreters to try to figure out what's not exactly there. One common attempt is to consider that perhaps the specific term that Jesus is using for dog means something like little dog, kind of like puppy, and that it's not actually derogative in that specific context. Now, I don't buy that specific theory, but I am intrigued by thinking about what's not there. For example, even if Mark tells us that this is what Jesus said, he doesn't give us any clue as to how he said it. Did he say it aggressively? Did he say it sounding annoyed? Did he say it laughing? Maybe he said it ironically? We don't know. But there's much more information in what we say than simply the content, which may be why we start Twitter wars much more easily than we would if we were actually sitting around a table sharing a nice pint of beer. But again, we don't know how Jesus said this. And it would be counterproductive to simply pretend that he didn't. So the question is, what do we know? Well, we do know that Mark is a very skilled editor and writer. That Mark knows what he's doing when he tells the story of Jesus in the particular way that he tells it. Putting certain stories together, connecting them in certain ways, making these literary structures and these semantic bridges. We've seen this in pretty much all our Sunday reflections up to now. You can check them out at our YouTube channel or on Instagram. So it's only logical to look at the literary context of this story. And doing that makes this story even more remarkable, I think, though for a quite different reason. Consider where Mark is coming from in his literary flow when he comes to this story. He comes from a discussion between Jesus and some teachers of the law, teachers of the Jewish law, about clean and unclean food and about what has the power to defile a person. That's what the discussion is about. So some of Jesus' disciples had been eating some food without washing their hands. Now, if for us that might be a matter of hygiene and health, especially in these corona times when we're all washing our hands like crazy, for the teachers of the law, it was much more than that. It was an issue of purity, an issue of religious righteousness. They accuse the disciples of eating with defiled hands and confront Jesus with their uncleanliness that leads to defilement. Jesus' answer seems at first like a weird detour because he starts talking about a different tradition involving a sort of religiously approved scheme that the teachers of the law had devised in order to effectively allow people to refuse help to their aging parents. What Jesus is pointing at, however, with this apparent detour, is the hypocrisy of a religious expression that has a higher regard for rules than for people and the actual will of God for people. Don't you see, Jesus says, that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach and out of the body. What comes out of a person is what defiles them. For it is from within, from a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. And Jesus goes on to name things such as greed, infidelity, arrogance, envy. All these evils come from inside and defile a person, Jesus says. It is very much to our benefit, I think, that Jesus uses a different example when addressing the issue, because otherwise we might think that this was simply about food. It most certainly was not, as the teachers of the law very well knew. Laws around food were part of a wider package of purity and purity laws that were quite central to Jewish identity and to their self-understanding as a people set apart for God, separated for God. The separating of food was a reflection, exercise of their separation as a people. That they were pure in their eating reassured them that they were pure as a people, was an enactment of that understanding. So much so that one of the central issues around the dealings between Jews and non-Jews was the issue of meals and food and how it was handled. So something's remarkably odd about this discussion and this story being followed by Jesus telling a Gentile woman that it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. And there's more. The geography in the Gospel of Mark is often a bit confusing and sometimes seems a bit off. And scholars have discussed about this quite a lot. But it's fairly clear that the area where Jesus is operating from verse 24 is a mainly Gentile territory, a non-Jewish territory on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. So it shouldn't really be unusual that a Gentile woman would come to Jesus, whose fame had already crossed the Sea of Galilee, that she would come to him for help when he's in that area. And in fact, the very next encounter that Mark describes that Jesus has is still in Gentile territory, in the region of the Decapolis, as it was called, where a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment is brought to Jesus. And there's no particular reason to assume that this man was a Jew. It would seem much more likely, considering Mark's insistence on naming the region, to think that he wasn't. Yet Jesus seems to have no issue in taking this man aside and healing him. And if this wasn't enough, Mark presents us next with a crowd. And if Mark doesn't, again, specifically tell us that this happened in Gentile territory, it is also noteworthy that he doesn't say that it's not, because Mark has this dynamic of making changes of scenery with boat crossings. So it goes into a boat and crosses, goes into a boat and crosses. And this scene change doesn't happen here. So it fits better within his narrative structure to assume that this is still in that same era, the same Gentile territory. And what happens next is a sort of a reenactment of something that had already happened in Jewish territory in chapter 6. So a crowd is gathered around Jesus. And they are getting hungry. They have been with Jesus for a long time, and they have nothing to eat. And Jesus feels compassion and decides to feed them. And then the disciples protest that they don't have enough bread to feed a whole crowd. Jesus then gets the few bread that they do have. Here in this story, it's 7 loaves, and in chapter 6, 5 loaves. And he gives thanks, and he has his disciples distribute the bread to the crowds. And everybody eats and is filled, and there's plenty of leftovers. Here in this story, 7 basketfuls of leftovers. In chapter 6, 12 basketfuls. So here we have a massive, miraculous meal in a crowd with certainly a fair number, if not a majority, of Gentiles. So in this whole wider section, Mark has no issue presenting Jesus healing, ministering to, and even sharing meals with Gentiles. So why this apparently incoherent story with the Syrophoenician woman right here in the middle? Now let's set the issue of the Jew-Gentile and clean-unclean divide aside for a moment, though, because there's more going on here in these stories. If that issue is one thread that sort of crosses this section of Mark, another one is the issue of the authority and power of Jesus. What authority does Jesus have to teach the way he teaches and do the things that he does? How does his power confirm or challenge that authority? When the Pharisees questioned Jesus, or questioned Jesus about the disciples' unclean hands, they don't really care about the disciples or their ritual cleanliness. It is Jesus that they are concerned about. It is him that they question. Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition but eat with defiled hands? What does that say about you? Jesus' answer, of course, shows that he knows that this isn't really about cleaning hands. He addresses not that specific set of rules, but the manner in which the teachers of the law handle the law in general, the way in which they wield their power as recognized authorities in scriptures. Then, after the bread feast later in the chapter on this one side of the lake, Jesus takes the boat back to the other side, and again the teachers of the law come to him, and this time they are demanding a sign, a miracle to test him, Mark says. What does Mark mean by test him? Well, apparently the teachers of the law want a sign of power and a sign that would confirm Jesus' authority, that would confirm the nature of his power and his right to wield it. Remarkably, though, for someone who just fed 4,000 people with 7 loaves of bread, Jesus' answers is, "Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation who asks for a sign." What are we to make of this? Mark just described a number of signs and miracles, and now he has Jesus saying that there will be no signs? Which one is it? Is there signs? Isn't there signs? The question perhaps is what you understand as a sign. Maybe we can frame the question differently. Who actually understands them as signs? Who understands these signs? The teachers of the law obviously don't. Nothing of what Jesus has been doing to this point in Mark, he has been doing in hiding. He's done several things in more private settings, several healings, but even those are soon word out on the streets and everybody knows about them. The teachers of the law, know about him, but still they ask for a sign. What are they really after? The teachers of the law are not alone, though, in not understanding or in misunderstanding what Jesus is up to. His own disciples don't get it. And that's sort of a third thread through this section of Mark. The disciples don't get it. And Mark lets us know that they don't understand. After the discussion about food in the beginning of chapter 7, they actually have to come and ask Jesus, what does this mean? What does what you said now mean? And Jesus answers, are you so dull? Don't you see? In other words, it's happening right in front of you. Don't you understand? Then when the crowd is hungry in the desert, they argue that they couldn't possibly get enough bread to feed all of them in such a remote place, even though they had witnessed a multiplication of bread in the very same kind of situation just 2 chapters before, as the narrative of Mark goes. And then when after telling the teachers of the law, after Jesus tells the teacher of the law that there will be no signs, he then warns the disciples to watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees, of the teachers of the law. The disciples think that Jesus is upset with them because they didn't have enough bread. They don't get it. So Jesus has to connect the dots for them. Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? He says. Don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketful of pieces did you pick up? And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? Do you still not understand? They had been part of a meal, of a feast, where the leftovers, the crumbs, were far more than what they had started with. And yet they are worried because they only have 1 loaf. The teachers of the law, they had seen Jesus heal and deliver people from impure spirits and all of that, and yet they ask for a sign. So the teachers of the law, they don't understand. The disciples, they don't understand. So who does understand? Who understands the signs? The Syrophoenician woman. The Gentile woman whose daughter was suffering. In the middle of this, all these people, the teachers of the law who knew the law by heart, the disciples who followed Jesus closely every day, she is the one who stands out as the only one who understands. The crumbs are enough. The crumbs are enough. When she comes to Jesus, she doesn't want his power. She wants his healing. What she's drawn to is not the authority of Jesus, it is his compassion. And she knows that that is enough. She knows it's all that her daughter needs and all that she needs. The teachers of the law don't get it because they're looking the wrong way. They want a sign of power that will affirm Jesus' identity and authority. But Jesus' eyes are elsewhere, looking at the suffering of the people with compassion. As the biblical scholar Clifton Black puts it, for Mark, that way of reasoning is backwards. Jesus' mighty works alleviate human suffering. They are not proofs of his identity. The teachers of the law didn't get it because they wanted a power that served authority, while Jesus displayed a power that served compassion. And why didn't the disciples get it? I can think of a number of different reasons, but maybe it's because this really isn't that easy. It goes against the grain of how we as humanity too often operate. For us, power serves power. Power serves authority and enables oppression. Power marks and reinforces difference and assures protection from assault. And I'm not talking only about governments and corporations and nations. I'm talking about personal relations. I'm talking about racial and ethnic divides. I'm talking about the reinforcement of gender inequalities. And I'm talking about religion. I'm talking about church. What are signs for? What are miracles and what are they for? What is the gospel for? Is it something that we wield in order to convince others and convince them if they refuse? Is it something that we spell out in order to affirm our authority, our position of superiority and purity, of cleanliness? Is it our shield against attacks on our perceived rights and entitlement? A sort of defense against this other that is conveniently defined in opposition to who we are. And what is Jesus in this context? Who is Jesus? And what is he for? Do we want Jesus to enable who we are? Or do we allow him to make us able to be more of who he is? The truth is, we often struggle to recognize that line between eating and claiming the bread. But here Mark has this Syrophoenician, this Gentile woman, lead the way. He lifts her up as an example of faith. She gets it. She gets it. She recognizes the miracle. She recognizes the sign of the Son of God. She recognizes because she is looking for grace and not for power. She, more than anyone else in these stories that we heard today, knows that the power of Jesus and recognizes the power of Jesus because she is drawn by his love, by his grace, and by his compassion. I'm not asking for the loaf, Jesus. I just want the crumb that will heal my daughter. I want this taste of receiving and taking part in your compassion and grace. Perhaps if we followed her lead, we might see the signs. Perhaps if we listened to her voice and followed her lead in coming to Jesus, we might be freed of ourselves in the most beautiful and truthfully freeing way. And I want to talk more about that next week. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you, and may he give you peace. Go in the name of the Lord of peace. Serve those around you, and serve the Lord joyfully.